Grief does not just steal your person. It steals your certainty. For 6 months, I'd been drowning in the quiet, empty routine of widowhood, coming home to silent rooms, cooking meals for one, staring at the wedding photo on my nightstand and wondering how I'd ever move on without Mason. Mason Brooks was the kind of man everyone admired. Quiet, steady, endlessly gentle with me. He was loyal, reliable, the kind of husband who remembered every anniversary, held me through every hard day, and never kept secrets. Or at least, that was what I believed. I thought I knew every part of him. I was wrong. The lawyer called me on a gray Tuesday morning, his voice careful and neutral as he delivered news that cracked my entire world open. During the final review of Mason's estate, they'd uncovered a second property, a remote farmhouse tucked deep in the countryside, 40 minutes outside our town. Registered solely under Mason's name, purchased 5 years into our marriage. Completely hidden from me. I froze the second I heard the words. A secret house. Mason and I had shared every asset, every savings account, every big decision for over a decade. We had no hidden properties, no private investments, no secrets. Or so I'd thought. The lawyer told me the house had been maintained quietly for years. No records of rentals, no listing history, no visitors logged on paper. It had just existed, silent, hidden, waiting, while I lived my ordinary, trusting life beside the man I loved. Doubt crept in cold and fast, winding around my heart like frost. What if this was another life? A second family? A truth Mason had buried so deep he'd taken it to his grave? I had to see it for myself. That afternoon, I drove down winding country roads I'd never traveled, following the GPS to an address I'd never known existed. The further I went from town, the quieter the world became, until all I could see were endless green fields, old oak trees, and a long, overgrown driveway hidden behind iron gates. This was the place. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I pushed open the rusted gate and drove forward. At the end of the driveway sat a cozy white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a blooming flower garden, and a wooden swing hanging from the ceiling. It looked lived in. Warm. Loved to lived in for an abandoned secret. Property. My breath caught when I spotted a small blue children's tricycle sitting on the front lawn. A child's toy. I parked the car slowly, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked toward the front door, half expecting emptiness, half terrified of what I might find. Before I could even lift my hand to knock, the front door creaked open. A stranger stood in the doorway, a young woman with tired, gentle eyes, holding a toddler in her arms. Behind her, down the hallway, I heard the faint sound of more children laughing and playing. Strangers living in my late husband's secret house. The woman tensed when she saw me, clearly startled by a stranger appearing on the porch. "I'm sorry," she said cautiously. "Are you lost?" I couldn't speak at first. My throat felt tight, my mind spinning into 1,000 terrible conclusions. This was not an empty vacation home. This was not a hidden investment. This was a house full of living, breathing people. People Mason had hidden from me for years. I finally found my voice, shaky and strained. "I'm Brooke, Mason's wife. I just found out this house exists." The woman's face drained of color in an instant. Her lips parted in shock, and she quickly stepped outside, pulling the door softly closed behind her, as if she was desperate to keep the children inside from hearing our conversation. Guilt washed over her features, clear, unmissable guilt. "You're his wife," she whispered, almost to herself. I nodded, my chest aching with betrayal. "Who are you? Why are you living here?" She hesitated for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She glanced back at the house, at the sounds of innocent childhood laughter echoing through the walls, then looked back at me with a fragile, broken honesty. "I can't explain everything," she said quietly. "Not yet. But you need to know. Mason was not hiding this house from you because of betrayal. He was hiding it to save us." Her words confused me, sharp and jarring against the heartbreak swirling in my chest. Before I could push her for more answers, my gaze drifted past her shoulder, toward the wall hanging in the living room, and my entire world tilted. On the wall, framed perfectly among warm family portraits, was a photograph of Mason smiling, kneeling down beside a group of small children, all of them grinning up at him like he was their hero. I'd never seen the photo before. Never seen these children. Never seen this side of my husband. In that moment, I realized the marriage I'd grieved for 6 months was not the honest, perfect love story I'd believed. Mason had left me with more than grief. He'd left me with a secret so massive, so life-altering, that everything I thought I knew about him was about to unravel completely. My eyes locked on that unfamiliar framed photo in the living room, and every rational thought in my head shattered. For 10 years, Mason had been my everything, my safe place, my most trusted person, the man who'd never kept a single secret from me. Yet here he was, frozen in a picture I'd never seen, smiling like he belonged in a life I'd never known existed. The young woman beside me tensed visibly, noticing my fixed stare. She tightened her hold on the toddler in her arms, her posture defensive yet sorrowful. like she'd been waiting for this day to come for years. "Who are those kids?" I asked, my voice cold and brittle, edged with the raw betrayal swirling in my chest. "Why is Mason in this photo? Why is any of this here?" She hesitated, swallowing hard, her gaze flickering between me and the closed front door. "I promised him I'd never tell. He said no one could know, not even you." "He's dead," I snapped, the grief and anger I'd suppressed for 6 months finally boiling over. "Mason's gone. And I'm his wife. I deserve the truth." My words hung heavy in the soft country air. The woman's shoulders slumped in defeat, and she let out a shaky breath, her walls crumbling little by little. "My name is Clara," she said quietly. "And every child in this house, every family that's ever stayed here, we're all survivors." Survivors, the word stopped me short, cutting through my storm of suspicion and heartache. I'd expected mistresses, a secret family, a double life built behind my back. I'd never expected this vague, gentle admission of survival. Clara must have seen the confusion on my face, because she finally stepped aside, granting me silent permission to enter the home I'd only just discovered existed. I crossed the threshold slowly, my shoes sinking into the soft woven rug Mason had never mentioned, breathing in the faint scent of vanilla and fresh laundry, warm, domestic. Nothing like the lies I'd imagined. The living room was lined with dozens of framed photos, all foreign to me. Mason appeared in nearly every single one, lifting giggling kids onto his shoulders, sitting cross-legged on the floor coloring with toddlers, wrapping a protective arm around teary-eyed women. In every shot, he looked softer, lighter, more unguarded than I'd ever seen him. Tears stung my eyes as I scanned the walls. We'd taken hundreds of photos over our decade of marriage, anniversaries, holidays, quiet weekend trips. But none of them held this quiet, radiant joy. None of them captured this version of my husband. "How long?" I whispered, turning to face Clara. "How long has he been doing this?" 8 years, she answered without hesitation. "Ever since I first met him." 8 years. For 8 years of our 10-year marriage, Mason had maintained this house, cared for strangers, built this entire hidden world, all without breathing a single word to me. A sharp, bitter ache twisted in my chest. Why hide it? If this was kindness, if this was good, why lock it away from the person he loved most? I wandered deeper into the house, my steps slow and unsteady, taking in every detail that contradicted the perfect, ordinary life we'd built in town. The bookshelves were lined with children's storybooks and parenting guides for trauma survivors. The kitchen cabinets were stocked with sippy cups, colorful plates, and child-safe utensils. Down the hallway, 4 small bedrooms stood open, each neatly made, each decorated with hand-drawn artwork and stuffed animals. This was not a temporary hideout. This was a home, lived in, cherished, intentionally built for people who had nowhere else to go. 2 small kids peeked out from a bedroom doorway, curious and shy, before scurrying back inside when they met my gaze. My heart squeezed tight at their innocence, at the quiet fear lingering in their eyes. Clara followed my line of sight, her voice soft with sorrow. "All of us came here running. Running from abuse, from violence, from homes that were supposed to protect us but hurt us instead. Mason found us, one by one. He bought this farmhouse, fixed it up himself, and kept it hidden. No leases, no public records, no social media, no loose ends. Just a safe place." I leaned against the hallway wall, my head spinning as pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed slowly clicked into place. All of Mason's late nights at the office. All of his sudden, unplanned trips out of town. All of the times he'd quietly withdrawn cash, turned down weekend gatherings, or said he had charity work to tend to. I'd always thought he was working. I'd always thought his secrecy was tied to his career. I'd never guessed he was quietly saving lives, yet doubt still lingered, sharp and unshakable. Why keep it a secret from me? Why never let me share this part of him? Why make me grieve a man I'd never fully known? Why didn't he tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. We had no secrets. I would have understood. I would have helped. Clara's expression softened, her eyes glistening with tears. He didn't keep it from you because he didn't trust you, Brooke. He kept it from you to protect you. Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the lawyer, sending over a final batch of documents tied to the farmhouse estate. Attached was a sealed letter, handwritten in Mason's familiar, neat handwriting. Addressed only to me. My breath caught. This was the explanation he'd left behind. The truth he'd spent 8 years hiding, finally waiting for me to uncover it. I stared at the envelope in my hand, knowing nothing in my life would ever feel the same once I broke the seal and read his words. The sealed letter felt weightless in my fingers. Yet it held the power to crush every lingering belief I'd held about Mason. The handwriting was unmistakably his, clean, steady, the same script he'd used for my anniversary notes and grocery lists. But this envelope carried no warmth, no greeting. Only my name scrawled across the front in solemn, final ink. Clara watched me carefully from the living room doorway. the toddler now resting quietly against her shoulder. The earlier tension in her shoulders had softened into quiet reverence, like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally read Mason's truth. The children's distant laughter faded into gentle background noise, and the entire farmhouse fell into a hushed, reverent pause. I sank onto the edge of a worn fabric sofa, the cushions molded from years of use, and broke the seal. My breath caught at the first line. My dearest Brooke, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And the last secret I kept is finally yours to know. Tears pricked my eyes instantly. I'd spent 6 months mourning a quiet, ordinary love. I'd grieved the loss of our simple dinners, our lazy weekend mornings, our quiet life together. I'd had no idea my husband had carried a second, exhausting life in the shadows all along. Mason's letter unfolded his truth slowly, carefully, like he'd written every word fearing I'd hate him for his secrecy. 8 years prior, long before we'd ever discussed buying a second home, he'd witnessed a young mother and her child begging for help on a rural roadside. They'd fled violent domestic abuse, left with no money, no family, nowhere to turn. No shelter would take them last minute, no agency could intervene fast enough to keep them safe. In that moment, Mason realized how many women and children slipped through the cracks, silent victims abandoned by every system meant to protect them. That was the day he decided to build a safe haven. No one could ever find out he'd purchased the remote farmhouse anonymously, paid every bill in untraceable cash, repaired every wall and fixture with his own hands to avoid outside contractors and loose paperwork trails. He'd built it not for profit, not for charity clout, but for absolute, unshakable safety. No social media mentions, no community donations, no public recognition. Just a hidden house where broken people could heal without being hunted down. My hands trembled as I read his explanation for why he'd hidden it from me. I kept this secret not because I doubted your heart, but because I feared for your safety. The men who hunt these women are cruel, relentless, and unforgiving. If they knew my wife knew, if they knew you were connected to this house, you would become a target. I could never let harm touch you. So I bore this alone. A sharp, aching sob caught in my throat. All those months I'd spent feeling lonely, wondering why he vanished for hours, why he turned down social events, why he sometimes came home exhausted with scraped hands and tired eyes. I'd misread every single moment. I'd thought he was distant. He was protecting people. I'd thought he was hiding selfish secrets. He was shielding me from danger. The letter went on to explain Clara's story. She was the first resident he'd ever sheltered. Her ex-husband was a violent, controlling man with local connections, someone who'd threatened to hunt her to the ends of the earth if she ever ran. Mason had pulled her from the brink of destruction, housed her, helped her rebuild her confidence, and supported her through legal proceedings to gain full custody of her children. In the years since, 12 more women and nearly 20 children had found refuge within these walls, each one running from unspeakable pain. Each one given a fresh start by my quiet, unassuming husband. He never let anyone find us, Clara whispered from across the room, sensing where I was in the letter. He changed our names temporarily, drove us to doctor's appointments himself, paid for our counseling and food out of his own pocket. He never asked for thanks. Never wanted any. I looked up from the page, my vision blurred with tears, and truly saw the room for the first time. The children's artwork taped to the fridge was covered in messy scribbled hearts labeled "Thank you, Mr. Mason." The books on the shelf were trauma-informed healing guides for kids. The soft blankets, the gentle nightlights, the child-proofed corners, every detail was intentional, every choice made with kindness most people never possess. Mason hadn't lived a double life of betrayal. He'd lived a double life of silent heroism, but the letter held one final, heavy revelation, a burden he'd left for me alone to carry. This house cannot stand empty, Brooke. These families have nowhere else to go. If you are willing, I leave this place in your hands. Finish what I started. Protect who I protected. But if you cannot bear the weight of this secret, I understand. Walk away, and no one will blame you. I folded the letter gently, pressing my fingers to the creases like I was touching his hand one last time. The anger and betrayal that had burned in my chest all morning melted away completely, replaced by a bittersweet, overwhelming pride. Clara stepped forward slowly, her voice soft and vulnerable. We've been lost since he passed. Mason handled every detail, every threat, every safety protocol. When he got sick, he never told us how serious it was. We had no idea we'd lose him so soon. We've been holding on, waiting for you, waiting to know if our safe home would disappear. Just as her words settled over me, my phone buzzed again. A new court document from my lawyer popped up on the screen. A formal notice. A dangerous restraining order hearing. One of the residents' abusive partners had tracked a faint lead. He knew someone was hiding his family. He was coming for them. The quiet safety Mason had spent 8 years building was about to be shattered. The sealed letter felt heavy in my palm, like Mason's entire unspoken life had been folded into those few pages. But before I could tear open the envelope, My lawyer's follow-up text flashed across my screen, sharp and urgent, freezing my breath mid-sigh. Brooke, watch yourself. A man named Ethan Hale has filed a motion to locate his estranged wife and child. Court records confirm he's flagged an unregistered rural safe residence in your farmhouse district. He's closing in fast. Clara saw the color drain from my face, and her whole body went rigid. The toddler in her arms stirred, sensing her mother's sudden tension, and buried their face into her shoulder. Ethan, she whispered, the name trembling on her lips like a curse. That's my ex-husband. He's the one Mason hid me from. In that moment, every protective choice Mason had ever made crashed over me in full, terrifying clarity. This was why he'd kept the farmhouse a secret. Not out of pride, not out of a desire to carry heroism alone, but because the people chasing these survivors were vicious, relentless, and dangerous. Ethan wasn't just an abusive ex. He was a man with law enforcement connections, a history of stalking, and a violent temper that had landed him multiple restraining orders none of his victims had ever dared fully enforce. Mason hadn't hidden his work from me to exclude me. He'd hidden it to shield me from a monster who would have targeted me simply for knowing the truth. He's been searching for us for 2 years, Clara said, her voice small and terrified. Mason always blocked his leads, erased his trails, paid off anonymous witnesses to throw him off. Every time Ethan got close, Mason shifted our schedules, changed our temporary contact info, and moved other residents to secondary backup properties. He was our shield. And now he's gone, I finished quietly. Silence settled thick over the farmhouse. Somewhere down the hall, the children's laughter died away. The warm, safe air that had wrapped around me moments earlier turned cold and fragile. Mason's shield was gone. And the threat was finally here. I quickly unfolded his letter, my fingers rushing past the gentle opening words, desperate for the instructions he must have left behind. Sure enough, tucked in the back of the pages, was a detailed, handwritten safety protocol, Mason's emergency plan for if a resident's abuser ever tracked the property. Lock all exterior gates. Activate the hidden perimeter alarms. Move all women and children to the reinforced basement safe room. Do not answer calls, do not open doors, do not engage. If my worst fear happens and I'm no longer here to protect them, you are the only one they have left. Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. He'd prepared for this. He'd known exactly what danger waited on the horizon. Even as he'd spent every day fighting to keep it far away from the people he'd saved, and far away from me. I folded the letter shut and lifted my head, my grief hardening into sharp, steady resolve. I was no longer just a grieving widow stumbling onto her husband's secret. I was the keeper of his promise. Clara, I said firmly, my voice calm despite the knot tightening in my chest. We follow his plan right now. No delays. She nodded rapidly, relief mixing with fear in her eyes. For months, she'd been adrift, holding this fragile safe house together with nothing but hope and memory of Mason's protection. Now she had someone to stand with her. We moved fast. Clara rushed to gather the children, herding them gently but firmly toward the hallway staircase that led down to the basement. I sprinted through the house, locking every window, latching every door, and engaging the hidden security system Mason had built into the home's walls, discreet sensors, silent alarms, and motion detectors I'd never known existed. The house hummed softly to life. Now fully fortified. I'd spent 10 years thinking our quiet suburban life was all Mason had ever cared about. I'd never realized he'd built 2 worlds, one peaceful and ordinary for me, and one dangerous and sacrificial for the strangers he'd sworn to protect. Seconds after I locked the final window, a loud engine rumbled down the long country driveway. My blood turned to ice. Through the front porch screen, I saw a black pickup truck roll to a stop just outside the iron gates. The driver's door swung open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. His gaze scanned the property sharply, cold and unhinged, zeroing in on the farmhouse like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Ethan hailed. He was here. From behind me, Clara breathed out a terrified whisper. He found us. After all these years, he finally found us. I stood firm in the center of the living room, my hand tightening around Mason's letter. The secret was no longer hidden. The protection was no longer silent. Mason's mission had fallen to me, and I would not let his legacy fall. The sealed letter felt weightless in my fingers, yet it held the power to crush every lingering belief I'd ever held about Mason. The handwriting was unmistakably his, clean, steady, the same script he'd used for my anniversary notes and grocery lists. But this envelope carried no warmth, no casual greeting. Only my name scrawled across the front in solemn, final ink. As if he'd penned it knowing this would be the last conversation we'd ever have. Clara watched me carefully from the living room doorway, the toddler now resting quietly against her shoulder. The earlier tension in her shoulders had softened into quiet reverence. She looked like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally understand the man who'd saved them all. The children's distant laughter faded into gentle background noise, and the entire farmhouse fell into a hushed, reverent pause. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ready to release the secret Mason had buried for nearly a decade, I sank onto the edge of a worn fabric sofa. Its cushions molded from years of quiet use and healing. And broke the seal. My breath caught at the first line. My dearest Brooke, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And the last secret I kept is finally yours to know. Tears pricked my eyes instantly. For 6 months, I'd grieved a small, ordinary love. I'd mourned our quiet weeknights, our simple dinners, our calm and predictable life together. I'd cried over the empty chair at our table and the silent passenger seat in his truck. Convinced I'd known every layer of the man I'd married. I'd had no idea my gentle, quiet husband had carried a second, exhausting life in the shadows all along. Mason's letter unfolded his truth slowly. Carefully, each word deliberate, like he'd feared I'd hate him for the years of secrecy. 8 years prior. Long before we'd ever discussed purchasing a second home. He'd witnessed a desperate young mother and her starving child begging for help on a rural roadside. They'd fled violent domestic abuse, left with no money, no family, and nowhere to turn. Public shelters were full. Legal agencies were too slow to intervene. No system would step in fast enough to keep them safe. In that hopeless moment, Mason realized the ugly truth: countless women and children slipped through the cracks. Abandoned by the very systems meant to protect them. That was the day he decided to build a safe haven no one could ever find. He'd purchased the remote farmhouse anonymously, paid every bill in untraceable cash, and repaired every wall, every fixture, with his own hands to avoid outside contractors and loose paperwork trails. He'd built this place not for profit, not for praise or charity clout, but for pure, unshakable safety. No social media mentions. No community donations. No public recognition. Just a hidden sanctuary where broken people could heal without being hunted down. My hands trembled as I read his explanation for why he'd hidden it from me. I kept this secret not because I doubted your heart, but because I feared for your safety. The men who hunt these women are cruel, relentless, and unforgiving. If they knew my wife knew, if they knew you were connected to this house, you would become a target. I could never let harm touch you. So I bore this alone. A sharp, aching sob caught in my throat. All those years of confusion finally clicked into place. All those late nights, his sudden unplanned trips, his exhausted eyes and scraped palms, his quiet refusal to explain his absences. I'd misread every single moment. I'd thought he was growing distant. He was saving lives. I'd assumed he was hiding selfish secrets. He was shielding me from unspeakable danger. The letter went on to explain Clara's story in full. She was the first resident he'd ever sheltered. Her ex-husband was a violent, controlling man with local law enforcement connections. A predator who'd sworn to hunt her down if she ever escaped him. Mason had pulled her from the brink of destruction. He'd housed her, fed her, comforted her terrified children, and walked beside her through every brutal court battle until she'd won full legal custody and protection. In the years that followed, 12 more women and nearly 20 children had found refuge within these walls. Each of them running from trauma, violence, and homes that were supposed to love them but hurt them instead. Each of them given a fresh start by my humble, unassuming husband. He never let anyone find us, Clara whispered from across the room, her voice thick with tears, sensing exactly where I was in the letter. He changed our temporary names, drove us to every doctor's appointment himself, paid for all our counseling and groceries out of his own pocket. He never asked for thanks. Never wanted any spotlight. He just protected us. I looked up from the page, my vision blurred, and truly saw the room for the first time. Children's artwork covered the fridge, messy crayon hearts and stick figures labeled shakily in childish handwriting. Thank you, Mr. Mason. The bookshelves lined the walls with trauma-informed healing guides and children's storybooks meant to soothe broken little hearts. Every blanket, every nightlight, every child-proofed corner was intentional. Every detail crafted for safety, healing, and peace. Mason hadn't lived a double life of betrayal. He'd lived a double life of silent heroism, but the letter held one final, heavy revelation, a burden he'd spent his last days preparing for me alone to carry. This house cannot stand empty, Brooke. These families have nowhere else to go. If you are willing, I leave this place in your hands. Finish what I started. Protect who I protected. But if you cannot bear the weight of this secret, I understand. Walk away, and no one will blame you. I folded the letter gently, pressing my fingers to the creases like I was touching his hand one last time. The anger and betrayal that had burned hot in my chest all morning melted completely away. Replaced by a bittersweet, overwhelming pride. Clara stepped forward slowly. Her voice soft and fragile, raw with months of suppressed fear. We've been lost since he passed, she admitted. Mason handled every threat, every safety protocol, every loose end. When he got sick, he never told us how serious it was. We had no idea we'd lose him so soon. We've been holding on, waiting for you, terrified our only safe home would disappear with him. Just as her words settled deep into my heart, my phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. A new court document popped up on my screen. Sent urgently from my lawyer. A formal notice of an upcoming restraining order hearing. An abusive former partner of one of the residents had tracked a faint lead. He knew someone was hiding his family from him. He was coming for them. The quiet, unbreakable safety Mason had spent 8 years building in secret was about to be shattered. The low rumble of a truck engine rolled up the overgrown driveway like distant thunder, cutting through the fragile calm of the farmhouse. Every small, safe sound inside vanished in an instant, the soft rustle of blankets, the quiet babble of resting children, the shaky breath Clara sucked in to steady herself. I slipped Mason's letter into the inner pocket of my jacket, pressing a palm flat over the fabric as if I could anchor myself to his courage. This was no longer a quiet discovery of his hidden kindness. This was the danger he'd spent 8 years shielding me from, the brutal, unrelenting cost of the sanctuary he'd built in secret. I crossed quickly to the front window and peeked through the thin curtain, my heart slamming hard against my ribs. A massive black pickup truck idled just beyond the iron gate, its tires crushing the tall grass Mason had always trimmed himself. The driver's door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall and broad, his shoulders coiled with barely contained violence. His jaw was tight, his gaze sharp and sweeping, scanning every inch of the property like he was cataloging every weakness, every hiding spot. Ethan Hale. Clara came to stand rigid at my side, her voice a trembling whisper only I could hear. That's him. That's the man Mason hid us from. Her fingers flew to her chest, instinctively covering the toddler tucked safely in her arms. He doesn't quit. Ever. If he's here, he's certain we're inside. I thought of the lawyer's message, the court filing, the faint lead he'd chased for months. Mason had spent years erasing their tracks, blocking his searches, cutting off every trail. But with Mason gone, the walls he'd built had started to crumble, and now the predator was here. Get everyone to the basement safe room, I ordered Clara, my voice steady and unshaking, no trace of my inner panic. Lock the door from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me. No matter what you hear, no matter what he shouts, stay hidden. She hesitated for half a second, fear flashing in her eyes. What about you? I'm going to hold the line. I glanced back at the hallway, where soft footsteps of other children had fallen dead silent. Mason left this house to me. I'm not letting anyone tear it down. Clara nodded, trust replacing her fear. She turned and fled down the hallway, her footsteps quick and quiet, her soft whispers guiding the rest of the women and children toward the reinforced basement Mason had built specifically for moments like this. Alone in the living room, I took one last breath and walked to the front door. Outside, Ethan had reached the gate. He gripped the metal bars hard, shaking them violently, the rusted iron groaning under his strength. The gate held firm, another one of Mason's hidden reinforcements. Thick bolts and steel framing hidden beneath plain paint. When the gate didn't budge, his head snapped toward the house, our eyes locked through the screen. A cold, lazy smirk tugged at his lips. He looked amused, not threatened, like he'd expected only scared women hiding inside, no one brave enough to face him. The front door clicked open under my hand. I stepped onto the porch, shut the door firmly behind me, and left the safety of the house at my back. Can I help you? I asked, calm and unyielding. Ethan leaned forward, his forearms resting on the gate, his eyes raking over me with blatant suspicion. This is private property, he said, voice low and rough. I'm looking for my wife and kid. They've been hiding from me for months. I got a tip they're here. My blood ran cold, but I didn't flinch. No one's here but me, I replied flatly. This is my property. No one's hiding out. You have the wrong address. He laughed then, a harsh, barking sound that carried across the quiet yard. It held no humor, only menace. Nice try. I know someone's here. A man's been hiding runaway women out in this old farmhouse for years. My Clara's one of them. His gaze sharpened, turning cold and demanding. Where is she? I lifted my chin, refusing to let him intimidate me. I don't know a Clara. You need to leave before I call the police for trespassing. The smirk dropped instantly from his face, his patience snapped. You think I don't have people on the force? He snapped. You think a little widow's threat scares me? That man who ran this place, Mason Brooks, he's dead. Everyone knows it. His protection's gone. There's no one left to shield them now. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. He knew Mason's name. He knew everything. He'd been waiting for Mason to die. Last chance, he growled, pushing off the gate and planting his feet like he was preparing to break through. Hand her over. Hand my kid over. Or I'm coming in to get them myself. My fingers tightened around the small emergency remote I'd grabbed from the kitchen counter, Mason's silent alarm trigger. Connected straight to local dispatch. I'd planned to wait. To stall. To buy the families inside more time, but before I could speak, a faint, tiny sound slipped out from the basement window at the side of the house, a child's quiet whimper. High and scared. Ethan's head whipped toward the sound in an instant, his eyes lit up with triumph. They're here, he snarled. I hear them. He stepped back, reached into his truck, and grabbed a heavy metal crowbar from the passenger seat. Panic flared hot in my throat, but I didn't move. I stood my ground on the porch, blocking his path to the house, every nerve in my body screaming to protect the people Mason had died safeguarding. The calm days I'd grieved were gone. The quiet life I'd known was over. I was no longer just Brooke, the grieving widow. I was the keeper of this safe house. The last line of defense, and Ethan Hale was about to find out I wasn't nearly as easy to break as my husband's silence had made me seem. The crowbar glinted sharp and cruel in the hazy afternoon sunlight, and every hair on my body stood on end. Ethan Hale's gaze locked on the basement window, his pupils blowing wide with feral certainty. He'd heard the child's whimper. He knew his family was hiding just feet beneath the grass, trapped and defenseless. There was no more lying, no more stalling. The bluff was broken. I planted my feet firm on the porch boards, shoulders squared, blocking the only clear path to the house. My fingers curled tighter around Mason's silent alarm remote, my thumb hovering over the trigger. One press, and help would be on the way, but help took time. And Ethan looked ready to destroy everything in front of him before a patrol car could round the country bend. "Leave," I said. My voice low and unshaken, steel woven into every syllable. "This is your final warning." Ethan let out a bitter, roaring laugh, hefting the crowbar in one hand like a weapon of war. The sound was animal, unhinged, stripped of every trace of humanity. He swung the crowbar hard against the gate's lock. Of frustration exploded across Ethan's face. I knew the gate wouldn't hold forever. Mason's reinforcements could delay him, but they couldn't stop a man hellbent on destruction. No blare, no siren, no warning to tip Ethan off. Just a silent, urgent signal sent straight to the county sheriff's dispatch, alerting them to trespass, imminent violence, and endangered children on private property. Mason had designed it that way, calm for the victims, crippling for the predators. "Come out, Clara." He bellowed suddenly, his voice booming across the yard, aimed directly at the hidden basement. "Come out with my kid, or I'll tear this whole house apart board by board. You think this dead man's walls can protect you forever?" I had to distract him, the words sliced deep. "You know nothing about my family," he snarled. "You know nothing about me." My words enraged him completely. For a long, terrifying second, we stood frozen, staring each other down. I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I raised my chin, holding his murderous gaze, and spoke the truth he'd spent years running from. He bared his teeth, ready to strike, ready to shatter the porch rail, break the door, or barrel straight through me to get to the people hiding behind my back. Sirens. Ethan's face drained of color in an instant. He wasn't untouchable. Not here. Not on Mason's land, but cornered predators don't always run. If he couldn't take his family back peacefully, if he couldn't break through the house before the police arrived, he would make sure no one got a happy ending. Then he sprinted toward the side of the house, straight for the unguarded basement entrance hidden in the tall grass, and the last door to safety was about to be breached. My blood turned to ice as Ethan bolted toward the side yard, his long strides eating up the distance between him and the hidden basement entrance. The tall overgrown grass swallowed his figure in seconds, masking his movements, turning the final stretch of land into a deadly blind spot. He knew exactly where to go. Mason had hidden the door well, buried beneath thick weeds and shadow, but Ethan had spent years studying this house, obsessing over every detail of the safe haven that had stolen his control. He'd waited for Mason's death long enough to memorize every weakness. The sirens blared louder, screaming through the valley, red and blue lights painting the treetops in frantic flashes, but they were still 30 seconds out. 30 seconds was all Ethan needed to break open the basement door, to reach the terrified women and children huddled in the dark. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted off the porch, boots slamming hard into the uneven grass, my lungs burning with every desperate breath. Fear roared in my chest, not for myself, but for the innocent lives counting on me. Mason had guarded them for 8 years. I would not fail him now. Ethan's hand was already closing around the rusted basement door handle when I skidded to a halt behind him. "Don't touch it," I barked, my voice sharp and unyielding. He whipped around, his face twisted into a feral snarl, pupils blown dark with madness. Panic and rage collided in his eyes, making him more dangerous than ever. Cornered, out of time, and unafraid to hurt anyone who stood in his way. "Get out of my way," he growled, shoving a hand toward my shoulder to knock me aside. I dodged the blow, stumbling back but holding my ground. I'd spent my whole life as the quiet, gentle wife, soft, calm, unwilling to fight. But Mason's secret had woken something new in me. Courage I never knew I had. A protector's fire. "This is your last chance to walk away," I warned him. "The police are here. You arrest yourself now, and this ends quietly. Keep going, and you face felony charges for assault, trespassing, and endangering minor children." He laughed, a raw, broken sound devoid of sanity. "Quiet endings aren't for people like me," he hissed. "Not after what he took from me." In one brutal motion, he twisted the basement handle and rammed his shoulder into the weak outer door. The wood splintered at the frame, cracking open a narrow gap. A wave of terrified silence spilled out from below, no cries, no whispers. Just the frozen stillness of people too scared to breathe. My heart shattered. He pushed harder, shoving the door wider. And I knew I was out of words, out of threats. Out of time. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm with every ounce of strength I had, yanking him backward off balance. He stumbled, stunned for half a second, clearly not expecting resistance from a woman he dismissed as a fragile, grieving widow. His shock flared into violent fury. He spun around, raising a fist to strike, and I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, but it never came. A deafening burst of sirens erupted directly beside the house. Tires screeched against the gravel driveway, loud and sharp. Multiple patrol cars skidded to a halt, blocking every exit. Flashlights sliced through the afternoon shadows, locking directly onto Ethan and me. Hands up. Get on the ground now. The officer's voices boomed, authoritative and unshakable, echoing across the yard. Ethan froze mid-movement, his raised fist hanging suspended in the air. The second he locked eyes with the line of armed officers surrounding him, every ounce of his rage crumbled into desperate surrender. He dropped his hands, his shoulders slumping in defeat, but his gaze never left mine. He stared at me with burning, vengeful hatred, a silent promise etched into every line of his face. This wasn't over. He would not forget this. Officers swarmed forward in an instant, cuffing his wrists behind his back, reading him his rights in rapid, steady tones. They seized the crowbar from the porch, documented the splintered basement door, and marked the entire property as an active safehouse crime scene. I stepped back, my legs finally giving out beneath me, sinking into the cool grass as adrenaline crashed through my system. My hands shook violently, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I'd never been so scared in my life, yet never so proud. One officer knelt beside me, voice gentle and reassuring. You did everything right, ma'am. You protected those people. You stopped him before anyone got hurt. Through the haze of my relief, I watched officers lead Ethan toward a patrol car. Before they shut the door, he twisted his head, his eyes finding mine one last time. The threat was clear, unspoken, and chilling. I stood slowly, brushing the grass off my clothes, and walked toward the damaged basement door. I pushed it open carefully, my voice soft and steady, meant to calm the terrified souls hiding below. It's okay, I called down into the darkness. He's gone. You're safe now. Seconds later, Clara's trembling face appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her toddler clutched tight to her chest. One by one, the other women and children emerged from the safe room, their faces pale, eyes wide with residual fear, but alive. Unharmed, they stared at me not just with gratitude, but with newfound hope. For the first time since Mason died, they weren't adrift. They weren't unprotected. I'd kept Mason's promise. I'd held his legacy safe, but as I watched the patrol car carry Ethan away, I knew this was only a temporary reprieve. His connections in local law enforcement were still active. His anger was only simmering, not gone, and when he got out of custody, he would come back for revenge, not just for his family, but for the life and the freedom I'd taken from him. The hum of police radios faded slowly into the distance as the last patrol car pulled off the gravel drive, carrying Ethan Hale away in temporary custody. The sudden silence felt hollow, untrusted, like the entire farmhouse was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I stood in the side yard, staring at the splintered basement door, my pulse still thrumming fast beneath my skin. The grass was crushed under my boots, trampled from the chase, and the faint scrape of Ethan's crowbar still lingered on the wooden frame. We were safe for now, but the cold weight of his final stare lingered in the air. A quiet promise of chaos to come. Clara stepped up beside me, her toddler now sleeping soundly against her shoulder, tiny fingers curled tight into her shirt. The terror in her eyes had softened into exhaustion, but her voice still shook when she spoke. He won't stay locked up long, she murmured, her gaze fixed on the empty driveway. He has friends in the department. Favors he's collected over years. Mason always knew that. That's why he never let his guard down. Her words twisted in my chest. Mason had prepared for every possible threat, every loophole, every dirty trick Ethan could deploy. He'd built walls, hidden doors, silent alarms, and safe rooms. But he'd kept all of it secret, leaving me to piece together the danger long after he was gone. I turned back toward the house, resolve settling hard in my bones. If Ethan had hidden connections, I needed to know them. If Mason had a contingency plan for this exact moment, I needed to find it. I need to see everything Mason left, I said firmly. Every file, every note, every protocol he kept here. Nothing stays hidden anymore. Clara nodded, no longer hesitant. She trusted me now, not as Mason's widow, but as the person who'd stood between them and ruin. There's a locked study in the back of the house. He never let any of us inside. Said it was for emergencies only. For the person who'd take over after him. My throat tightened. That person was me. I followed her down the quiet hallway, past the children's bedrooms and cozy living spaces, until we reached a plain wooden door tucked at the far end of the house. It looked unassuming, blending into the wall like just another storage closet, but the heavy lock and reinforced frame told a different story. This was Mason's command center, the heart of his entire operation. He never gave us the code, Clara said softly. I pulled the worn letter from my jacket pocket. The final words Mason had written to me folded neatly inside. I'd memorized every line, but I flipped through the pages again, searching for anything I'd missed, a number, a date, a clue only I would know. Halfway down the last page, scribbled in tiny, faint handwriting at the bottom margin, was a sequence, our wedding anniversary, the code he'd never shared with anyone else. The code only his wife could know. My fingers trembled as I punched the numbers into the lock. A soft click echoed through the quiet hallway, the door swung open. The study was nothing like the warm, gentle home outside. It was sparse, clinical, lined floor to ceiling with locked filing cabinets, labeled binders, and a wall of digital monitors that sat dark and dormant. A sturdy wooden desk occupied the center of the room, stacked with organized folders, case notes, and printed legal documents. This was where Mason had spent his hidden nights, his secret weekends, his unaccounted-for hours. This was where he'd fought to protect dozens of vulnerable families, all while I slept peacefully in our suburban home. Completely unaware, I crossed to the nearest cabinet and unlocked it with the same code, my breath catching at what I found inside the files. Dozens of them, each labeled with a woman's name, each packed with restraining orders, police reports, witness statements, and detailed threat assessments. Every survivor who'd ever stepped foot in the safe house had a folder. Every abuser thoroughly researched, every risk meticulously documented. I flipped through them slowly, stunned by the depth of Mason's work. He hadn't just hidden these families. He'd investigated their abusers, tracked their movements, documented their crimes, and built legal cases quietly, patiently, over months and years, until my fingers landed on a thick, unmarked folder at the very back of the cabinet. No name, no label, just a single red stamp across the front, high risk, active threat. My pulse spiked. I opened it, and my world shifted all over again. It was Ethan's file, but it was far more extensive than Clara's story. Mason hadn't just been hiding Clara and her children from Ethan. He'd been investigating a network of corrupt local officials, small-town bribes, and protected abusers Ethan was connected to. Ethan's police connections weren't just random favors. They were ties to a quiet, long-running ring of negligence and cover-ups. A handful of local officers, court clerks, and small-town officials who'd been shielding violent men for years, dismissing survivor claims, sealing abusive records, and letting predators walk free. Mason had known. He'd known the entire system was rigged against these women, and he'd been gathering proof to take it down. Stacked beneath the reports were dated photos, text screenshots, recorded phone calls, and handwritten logs of every dirty deal, every dismissed case, every covered-up assault. Mason had been building a bombshell case for years, biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to expose the entire corrupt network, but he got sick before he could finish. A cold, horrifying realization washed over me. Ethan's rush to get out of custody wasn't just about reclaiming his family. It was about stopping Mason's evidence from coming to light. It was about silencing anyone who could finish what Mason started. Clara leaned in beside me, her voice barely a whisper as she scanned the files. Mason never told us how deep it went. He just said the danger was bigger than any one man. I stared at the mountain of proof in my hands, at the years of silent, dangerous work my husband had carried alone, and understood the full weight of his secret. Ethan wasn't just coming for Clara and her kids. He was coming for me. For these files. For the truth that could destroy every corrupt person who'd ever protected him, and worst of all, somewhere in this small town, Mason's hidden enemies were already watching, waiting, and planning to finish what Ethan started.